Today, I want to do something that is almost surely going to anger multiple fan bases, which is to put together a team made up of the most overrated players of 2025. Shout out here as well to Foolish Bailey, who did one of these videos on guys who played way out of position that directly inspired this video. Go check out that one as well. Now, here's my criteria. Guys can only be considered at their primary position per Fangraphs, meaning they can have spent time at multiple others, but whichever they spent the majority of their time is where they could possibly slot in. We'll start at catcher and then move our way position by position. I will also do a starter, but no relievers, as I really couldn't find bullpen guys that are universally seen as better than they are, with the closest being somebody like Jeff Hoffman, but I'm sure if you ask Blue Jay fans, it's not like he's seen as lockdown exactly. With that being said, let's hop right into it, with our first selection being Salvador Perez at backstop. Now, this is a great opportunity to say I am not claiming these guys are bad players or anything. Perez overall had a decent year in 2025 per a lot of metrics, including home runs with 30, RBIs with 100, and slugging percentage at 446. However, due to his always poor fielding peripherals, and the fact that all of that production only added up to an F-WAR of 0.5, B-WAR of 0.4, OPS of 729, and OPS plus of exactly 100, I think we can say he didn't really manage to live up to the borderline Hall of Fame image that a certain contingent of MLB fans have ascribed him. Is he still a solid player? I think the answer is yes, but those counting stats do a disproportionate amount of heavy lifting in the general public's opinion. Moving on to first base, we really only have one major candidate, being Luis Arraez. This is a guy who's on a 2-year run of being just above average in terms of OPS, well below in any power metric, and relatively abysmal when it comes to getting on base. Yet, because he leads the league in singles every year, you have quite a number of people claiming he's the second coming of Tony Gwynn. Even though in Tony's entire career, he never had a single full season with an OPS under 770, let alone the sub 740 range that Luis has been existing in for the last 300 games. Add in the fact he plays terrible defense at first base, and you get a total value that, per all major evaluators, was below Nolan Shanwell and Miguel Vargas in 2025. It'll be fascinating to see what his free agency comes out to over this offseason. I think this is a good time to specifically note here that disappointing is different from overrated. A guy like Ozzie Albies, for example, certainly disappointed and has for the last 2 seasons, but I haven't really heard a lot of people talking about him as if he's still the same guy he once was. It's for this reason I'm going to choose Jackson Holliday at second base, who I do think still has a group of people behind him who believe a breakout is just around the corner, even when, unfortunately, this doesn't really seem to be the case as of now. Sure, his raw numbers were disappointing this past season, including a sub 700 OPS, nearly 3-to-1 strikeout to walk ratio, and poor base running metrics for a dude who has really good speed. But beyond this, it was the advanced numbers that really let you down, as he was not only one of the worst fielders in the entire sport at his position, but all of his savant totals when it came to his bat and legs were far below average, and I think far below where anybody reasonably expected them to be. Even if he is still very young, I'm not sure the superstar ceiling we all thought was once there is still on the table at this point. Next up at shortstop, we have a bit of an unfortunate one in my opinion, being Javier Baez. Yes, he bounced all around the field, but at the end of the day he appeared the most up the middle, and really through no fault of his own, ended up getting pretty overrated throughout the season, leading to an all-star appearance in the same year where he posted a sub 300 OBP, sub 400 slug, and 109 strikeouts to just 10 walks. It's not often you see a guy hit more homers than he has in free passes when he only has 12 bombs in 126 contests. As a fan of the Tigers myself, I certainly enjoyed seeing him have stretches where he looked like the old El Mago, especially in the field and in the playoffs, but I think a lot of people probably assume this year ended up looking a lot better than it did. Rounding out the infield at third base, we have our first and only definite future Hall of Famer. I'm talking about 8-time All-Star, 5-time Silver Slugger winner, and 10-time Gold Glover, Nolan Arenado. Sure, he was on a 2-year run prior to 2025, where he was operating a little bit lower than he used to, with an OPS in the 750 range, with around 20 homers and above average defense year to year. But these days, he's playing more and more like an average contributor, toting a 666 OPS in 2025 with an 87 OPS plus and 289 on base percentage. Just look at his savant page for the last year. Those are numbers you'd expect to see from a backup middle infielder, not a guy with over 350 big league bombs. And yet, during the season, there were still quite a few people I saw in the baseball space talking about how him getting moved to a contender could potentially move the needle in a playoff push. I'd love for him to have a bounce back in 2026, but there's no doubt in my mind, he no longer is a top 10 third baseman in the major leagues, let alone the top 3 status he operated in for so long. Moving to the outfield, and specifically left, I'm going to go with Jason Dominguez. Now, I'm not trying to knock a guy who at 22 threw up league average hitting numbers along with 23 steals, but he somehow managed to finish top 15 in Rookie of the Year voting, despite both major value aggregators having him at sub 1 WAR, finishing ahead of guys like Kyle Teel and Jake Mangum, who produced roughly 3 times his value, When your hitting isn't standout, yet you post -9 fielding runs in just 123 games, you aren't a very good player, and certainly not worthy of any award consideration whatsoever. I'm not nearly as out on him at this point as Holiday, as he still does have some objective skills, including an elite bat speed, but he's either going to have to do something about that glove or drastically improve his numbers at the plate going forward, if he's going to attempt to live up to that once lofty prospect status. In center, I think you could make a decent argument for Joe Adell, considering the fact that there was a large number of people talking about his year as a breakout season that featured 37 homers, despite the fact he was one of the worst fielders in baseball overall, giving back a ton of that value, with the Soto-like fielding run value performance at -13. However, this is a guy with elite predictive numbers overall, so it's not like the skills were a mirage. And I do think this does deserve that label as a breakout. But one guy who is another AL East rookie who hardly brings his glove to the field, and yet doesn't have any of those redeeming features, is Chandler Simpson, who is actually tied in Rookie of the Year voting at 13th with Dominguez. In a manner similar to Arraez, it's not his fault that he's had a bunch of older baseball fans champion his profile as a slap hitter, a label that arguably works even better with him since he also has elite speed. But the problem is that he not only is horrible defensively, like I just alluded to, but the dude doesn't offer literally anything at the plate besides singles. Not even hardly drawing walks, with just a 326 OBP in 2025 despite the fact he hit 295. Which, when combined with a 345 slug, gives you an OPS of 671 and an OPS plus of 89. It's not that he doesn't have some elite skills. It's just that he's got to get better in a couple key capacities if he wants to fully utilize them. And he's certainly not a fully actualized Major League player yet, despite what some old heads may tell you. In right field, we have two major options, being Teoscar Hernandez and his abysmal total value, despite registering 25 home runs in a couple big postseason moments, and Nick Castellanos, who's definitely going to be my pick here, because he is basically of the same mold as Hernandez, but worse. Yet I think is still seen overall throughout the league as a solid player. Maybe not one worth $20 million a year, but the type of guy who would contribute to a championship-seeking team. Not the absolute positional black hole he's become over the last couple seasons. This is a guy who in his entire time in Philadelphia, spanning 4 full years, has managed to post 1.3 total BWAR. In 2025, his hitting fell off a cliff with a sub-700 OPS, his fielding was as bad as ever with a -12 fielding run value, and what made all of this worse is that the guy couldn't take being replaced late in games defensively, despite the fact that most nights he'd struggle to catch a cold. I don't think people view him as a star, but I would argue they don't see him for exactly what he is, an objectively sub-replacement level player at this point. For RDH, we have to go with somebody who didn't have an exceptionally bad year or anything, nor are they seen as the pinnacle of greatness in Major League Baseball. But Andrew McCutchen did post his worst career slugging percentage and tied for his lowest OPS ever in a campaign in 2025, which I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't be aware of relative to his reputation of solid production at the plate. Again, this is more of an example of, I'm pretty sure most people who, if you ask them how Andrew did this past season, would be like, pretty good, but it actually wasn't all that productive in an on-field capacity, though I'm sure his leadership was invaluable in the clubhouse. More of a product of there not being a ton of good options here versus anything Andrew himself did or didn't do. And now on to our final spot, starting pitcher. This exercise actually brings out a bit of a realization for me, which is that in today's modern era, with all the analysis we have for arms, there actually aren't a ton of overrated starters. The general public perception is pretty on point for the vast majority. That makes this selection a bit of a difficult one, much like with DH, but I guess if I had to pick somebody, it would be Luis Castillo, because he's still seen as one of the better starters in Major League Baseball, despite the fact that he's had rapidly declining pure stuff over the last couple seasons and K rates that have been falling through the floor, along with the fact that his ERA since he arrived in Seattle has looked a lot better than it probably should have because of the park that he plays in, with an ERA plus barely above league average during his time there. Alright, that was putting together the 2025 MLB All-Overrated team. Let me know if you want to see me do this again for underrated players or for any other team concepts like this. Feel free to suggest these in the comments below. Alright everybody, if you made it this far, I appreciate you watching, and if you did, consider checking out any of these other videos on your screen right now for other content just like this. Also, if you ever see anything you'd like to see me detail in the video, feel free to reach out to my email, basebpoet@gmail.com, and if I end up using your idea, I'll give you a shout out. Thanks for watching, have a great rest of your day.